The snow was falling harder now, cold and heavy, covering everything in white. Jake sat inside the transport vehicle, watching the frozen land outside the cracked window. The sky above was gray, and the wind howled like something alive. He was supposed to reach Outpost 12 by night, but the storm had arrived early. Beside him sat Raya, a canine alien girl from the Woolarai species. Quiet and still, she wore a torn coat, her ears flat against her head, and a metal collar around her neck that had the words "Property of Outpost 7" printed on it. She didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just followed orders. To Jake, she was just a delivery assistant, someone assigned to help move cargo. But there was something about her silence that felt too heavy, too trained. She sat with her hands in her lap, her eyes watching the snow like it might attack. Jake reached for the controls and turned the ignition again. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then went silent. He tried again, pushing the buttons harder. Nothing, just the sound of the wind pressing against the vehicle walls. "Come on. Don't do this now," he whispered. They were in the middle of nowhere. Miles from the nearest base, no signal, no backup engine, and the power core was already running low. He stepped out of the vehicle and sank knee-deep into the snow. The wind slapped his face as he opened the side hatch to check the engine. Raya stepped out behind him without a word, her feet bare in the snow. Jake looked back, surprised. "Aren't you cold?" he asked. She didn't answer, just stared at the sky, sniffing the air. Her fur was already dusted with snowflakes. She said softly, "Storm's getting worse." Jake blinked, surprised to hear her voice. It was the first time she had spoken. "Since the journey began, you can talk," he said, half smiling. Raya gave no reply, only looked at the dead engine with tired eyes. He went back inside to warm his hands while Raya stayed outside, crouching low near the front of the sled. Then, without asking, she gripped the broken tow chains and pulled them over her shoulders. Jake ran out, confused. "Hey, what are you doing?" She looked over her shoulder, her breath fogging in the air, and said, "Then I pull." Before he could stop her, she leaned forward and began dragging the entire transport cart. Her hands dug into the snow, her claws gripping the ice, and slowly, inch by inch, the heavy sled began to move. Jake stood frozen, watching the unbelievable scene. The cart was meant to be pulled by a fusion engine, not by a girl with fur and bruises on her arms. The way she moved, steady, powerful, quiet made his chest tightened. He grabbed a thermal blanket and ran toward her, trying to wrap it over her shoulders, but she shook her head and said, "Keep it, you'll freeze." Jake didn't know what to say. She was doing what machines couldn't, and she wasn't asking for help. Hours passed as they moved slowly through the deep snow. Jake walked beside her now, silent, unsure whether to feel guilty or amazed. He tried to take over once, grabbing the chains, but he slipped and fell hard. Raya didn't laugh, didn't speak. She just kept pulling. Once in a while, she would stop, shake the snow off her back, then continue. The sky grew darker, and the snow fell even faster. Jake realized they might not make it to the next shelter in time. He finally said, "We need to rest, or you'll collapse." Raya paused, panting, then whispered, "No rest, not allowed." Jake frowned. "What do you mean, not allowed?" She didn't answer, only tightened the chains and pulled again. That sentence stayed in Jake's mind like a sharp blade. Not allowed, like someone had trained her to suffer, to keep going no matter what. She wasn't a helper, she was a tool. And someone had treated her that way. It made Jake's blood boil suddenly. She stumbled and dropped to one knee. Jake rushed forward and caught her just before she fell into the snow. He saw blood on her hands. Her claws had split from the cold and hard pulling. "You're hurt," he said. "We need to stop." Raya shook her head, tears mixing with the snow on her face. Jake pulled her into the cart, wrapped her in blankets. and sat beside her. He didn't speak, didn't ask questions, just held the heat pack near her hands. Outside, the snow kept falling, but something had changed. This wasn't just a trip anymore. He looked at the girl beside him, no longer a quiet shadow. And for the first time, he said softly, "I'm not letting you pull this alone again." Raya didn't answer, but she looked at him, really looked at him, and in her tired eyes, there was something new. Not fear, not obedience, but hope. The wind screamed louder that night. Like a voice calling from the sky, Jake sat inside the cart, his back against the cold metal wall. Watching Raya sleep under the blanket, she didn't move much, just breathed. Slowly, her arms wrapped around her chest like she was afraid to take space. The small heater inside the cart buzzed weakly, barely enough to keep the air from freezing. Jake checked the power again, only 20% left. Not enough to make it through the night if they stayed still, but he couldn't let her pull. Again, not with her hands bleeding like that. Outside, the snow was starting to let up, but it was still deep. Jake stood at the back of the cart and stared at the white world around him. He felt useless. A man with tools he didn't know how to fix, and a girl who shouldn't have to save him. He heard movement behind him, turned, and saw Raya sitting up slowly, her blanket slipping off her shoulder. She looked at him and asked quietly, "Is it morning?" Jake nodded, sort of. Raya tried to stand, but her knees buckled, and she grabbed the edge of the cart to hold herself up. Jake stepped toward her. "You don't need to pull anymore." She looked at him with confusion. Then, "How will we move?" Jake didn't answer. Not yet. They spent a few minutes boiling snow to make warm water. Jake handed her a cup and noticed how carefully she held it, like it might be taken away at any second. "I used to belong to a man who raced beasts," she said suddenly, without looking up. Jake froze, the cup halfway to his lips. "He said my kind were made to obey, not speak," she continued, her voice soft and flat. Jake's chest felt tight. "Do you believe him?" he asked. Raya looked at him for a long second. "I don't know." Jake leaned forward. "You pulled me through a storm. You saved our cargo. You don't belong to anyone." Her eyes didn't show belief, just silence. Like she had heard words like that before, and nothing changed. Later, Jake checked the map, then stared at the frozen ground. There was one possible route. Down the slope through a forest path. Risky, but it would take them closer to Outpost 12. He stepped outside and started gathering ropes and wooden rods from the storage compartment. When Raya joined him, she saw what he was doing and tilted her head. "What's that?" she asked. Jake smiled faintly. "A harness, but not for you alone." She looked confused. "Then, who else?" He tapped his chest. "Me." She blinked. "You?" "I'm not going to ride while you bleed," he said, tying the final knot. Raya didn't speak. But something in her face changed, almost like a question she didn't know how to ask. Together, they pulled, side by side, through the quiet snow. Jake wasn't as fast or strong as her. He tried, and she noticed every time he slipped. She steadied him every time she coughed from the cold. He gave her his scarf. It wasn't easy, and the cart creaked behind them with every step. The silence of the land made every sound louder. Every breath deeper. As they moved, Raya whispered, "No one ever helped me pull before." Jake didn't answer, just smiled through the cold. They didn't need words anymore. Hours passed, and the sky began to shift to a dark gray they found. A wide hill ahead, the trees thick like shadowy figures. The forest path was known for wild creatures. Jake remembered the warning from the last outpost. Still, they had no choice. They were running out of time as they stepped into the woods. Raya suddenly stopped, her nose twitching. Jake looked at her. "What is it?" She narrowed her eyes and whispered, "We're being followed," before he could react. A loud howl echoed behind them. Then another. Closer. Jake's heart dropped, and Raya's claws slid out from her fingers. She turned to face the trees, her body low, ready to fight. From the shadows, glowing eyes appeared. Not one, not two, but 5, maybe more. Jake reached for the flare gun inside his coat, but before he could pull it out, Raya growled. It wasn't fear, it was warning. The creature stepped into the light part. Human, part wolf, eyes red, teeth sharp, Jake whispered, "We have to run." But Raya didn't move. She glanced at him and said, "No, I've run all my life then, without waiting." She launched forward into the snow, claws flashing, voice fierce. Jake could only watch in stunned silence as the quiet girl he thought was broken became something wild. The forest echoed with shouts and growls, and Jake realized this journey wasn't just about survival, it was about freedom. The forest was still again, but it wasn't peaceful. The snow had been kicked up in wild patterns. Claw marks slashed across tree trunks. Jake stood alone beside the cart, his heart racing. Waiting for Raya to return from the fight, his hand gripped the flare gun. Useless now, too slow, he had only seen a flash of her leaping into the dark. Then sounds, growls, screams, silence, and now? Nothing. He stepped forward, calling softly. Raya, the forest didn't answer. He walked further. The crunch of his boots loud in the cold. Then he saw her, crouched low beside a tree, breathing hard. Blood dripping from her fur, but it wasn't her blood. Her eyes were glowing softly in the dark, her body still tense. She looked up at him, and something in her gaze was different. She wasn't just a girl anymore, not a servant, not a tool. She was something ancient. Something powerful. Jake reached her side slowly, his hands up. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Raya blinked, then nodded, her body slowly relaxing. "They ran," she said. "They were not hunters, just scavengers." Jake knelt beside her and saw the cuts on her arm. "Let me help," he said. "Ape!" Pulling a med patch from his coat as he placed it on her wound, she flinched but didn't pull away. "You didn't have to fight," he whispered. "Yes, I did." She replied, "I've always run, but not this time." They walked back to the cart together. Both quiet, both tired. The forest didn't feel as dangerous now, but Jake knew they couldn't stay long. The storm had left the path broken, trees had fallen, and snow covered most of the route. He checked the sled, made sure it wasn't damaged. Then looked at her again. She was staring at the collar he had removed earlier, still lying in the back. Without a word, she picked it up, turned it in her hands, then threw it deep into the woods. Jake watched it disappear into the trees, never to return. They traveled again the next day, the cold biting at their clothes, but this time Jake noticed something new. Raya didn't walk behind the cart or beside it. She walked slightly ahead, like she was leading, not following when she stopped. Jake stopped. When she moved, he moved. There was no need for commands, no need for roles, only understanding. They passed an old tower buried in snow, broken antennas sticking out from the top. Jake pointed. "Could be a relay." Raya nodded, and together they climbed the stairs, snow crunching under each step. Inside, it was quiet, dust frozen in the air. Equipment frozen and half dead. Jake worked on the comms panel while Raya watched the door. He whispered, "If I can get this working, maybe we can send a signal." Raya tilted her head. "You think someone will come?" Jake smiled. "Maybe. Or maybe they'll just hear us." The panel sparked, then hummed softly. And a green light blinked. Jake leaned close, adjusted the settings, and said, "This is Jake Carter, Human Transport Officer. Stranded in Zone 7, cargo intact. 2 survivors requesting pickup." He paused, then added quietly, "She's not cargo. She's someone you need to meet." Raya turned away from him and walked toward the window. She looked out at the snow-covered trees, her eyes thoughtful. "I was raised in a cage," she said suddenly. They called me Alpha because I bit back once. Jake looked at her reflection in the glass. You're not that anymore. She turned. Then what am I? Jake didn't answer right away. He walked up beside her and said, Free. The signal kept blinking, but no reply came. Still, Jake and Raya smiled at each other, like that word was enough for now. Free, a word she had never used before. But now it belonged to her. They left the tower as the wind picked up again. The road ahead was still long, still dangerous, but they weren't afraid anymore. Not of storms, not of wolves, not of what they used to be, as they pulled the cart together once more. Side by side, Raya whispered, I don't feel like property now. Jake replied, You never were. The sky turned orange as the sun tried to rise behind heavy clouds. They had been walking for hours. The snow crunching under their feet, the cartwheels creaking with every bump. Raya walked with her head down. Not from shame now, but from thought. Jake noticed she hadn't spoken in a while. And her steps were slower than usual. He asked softly, You all right? She nodded, but something was off in her voice. There's something ahead, she said quietly. Jake squinted through the trees, and soon he saw it too. A structure, metal and wide. Half buried in snow, not a building, something different, something older. They walked closer until the full shape revealed itself. A crashed ship, rusted, torn in half, like it had fallen from the sky years ago. Jake's heart jumped. That's a military model. He moved forward quickly, hoping for supplies or maybe even old tech. Raya didn't move. She just stared at the broken ship, her fur standing up. Her eyes wide, Jake climbed the side of the wreck, kicking snow off the metal door. Inside, the air was stale, cold, and filled with dust. Broken chairs, shattered screens. Bones covered in frost snow, one had survived. He moved carefully, looking for anything that still worked. A signal booster, an energy cell, a weapon, but Raya didn't follow. Not yet. She stood still in the snow, her fists tight, her tail low. When Jake came back out with a small supply pack, he asked, What is it? She pointed at a symbol on the ship's hull. A mark that had faded, but was still visible, 3 lines in a triangle. With a single slash through them, that was the mark of my keeper, she whispered. Jake turned slowly. This was his ship. She nodded once. I was born in cages, just like the ones inside. She said, He used to say, if I ever tried to run, I'd end up like them. Jake felt anger rise in his chest like fire. This man crashed and died out here. He said, maybe the stars punished him. Raya stepped forward and walked into the wreck silently. She found the holding cells still locked with long-dead power inside one. There were scratches on the wall tallies, hundreds of them, and a name written in small, carved letters. Raya touched the name gently, her hands trembling. Jake placed a hand on her shoulder. We don't have to stay here, but she shook her head. I need to see it. She opened the next cell, and inside, in the corner, lay a small toy wooden, shaped like a fox. She picked it up slowly and whispered, My sister used to hold this. Jake froze. Your sister? She didn't survive, Raya said. I thought maybe... But now I know. They sat together in silence for a while. The wind howling through the cracks in the ship. Jake lit a small heat lamp. Placing it between them, Raya didn't cry, but her eyes were wet. I used to think I was the last, she said softly, the only one who remembered. Jake looked at her. You're not alone anymore. She glanced at him, her voice low. Why do you care? Jake thought for a long moment before answering. Because no one should be born in a cage, he said, not even on this frozen world. Raya leaned her head against the wall, the toy still in her hands, that night. They didn't keep watch. They stayed inside the wreck. Surrounded by ghosts, but not afraid. Jake patched her wounds again and placed his jacket over her as she slept. Outside, the snow fell quietly, but inside, Something old had broken, and something new had begun to grow. By morning, Raya walked out of the ship without looking back. She left the collar, the scars, and the silence behind. Only the toy remained in her coat pocket, a memory that would never fade. Jake followed her as she stepped into the snow, her steps stronger, her eyes brighter. She didn't need to speak, but Jake knew what she felt. They were no longer just survivors. They were changing together. And in a world that tried to keep her crawling, she was learning how to stand. The air was sharper now, thinner, colder, like the wind itself had changed. Jake and Raya had left the broken ship far behind, walking through deeper snow and silence. Neither of them spoke for a long time, not because they were angry, but because they both understood what silence meant now. It wasn't fear anymore. It was memory. And sometimes memory was heavier than any cart. They reached a frozen valley by sunset. A low basin surrounded by tall cliffs of black ice. The cold here was biting, worse than anywhere else they'd been. Jake's fingers were numb even through his gloves, and his nose had started to bleed from the cold. Raya noticed, and for the first time, she insisted they stop. She helped him build a shelter out of snow blocks and thermal blankets. When it was done, she crawled inside first and waited, watching the entrance like she used to watch her cage door. Jake slid in beside her, their bodies brushing for warmth. Neither said anything at first, just sat close in the small space. The shared heat of survival between them. Raya looked at him and said, "Your lips are turning blue." Jake gave a weak laugh. "Yeah, I can feel that." Without waiting, she pressed closer, wrapped her arms around him, and pulled him against her chest. Her body was warmer, her fur thick and soft. Jake stiffened at first, surprised, but then let go. Relaxing into her hold, "You saved me more than once," he said. Voice rough, "You never treated me like a thing." She replied, Jake whispered, "Because you're not." There was a pause. Then she added, "Then why do I still feel like one sometimes?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, pulled off his glove and gently touched her wrist. "Because healing is slow," he said, "but it's happening. I can see it." The wind howled again outside, shaking the walls of the shelter. Jake shivered, and Raya growled softly. Pulling a blanket over them, she lay down on her side. Tugging him with her, "You can sleep," she said. "I'll keep you warm." Jake hesitated, his heart racing in the quiet, but then nodded. "Only if you rest too." They lay like that for a while, the storm outside loud, but the world inside their little shelter completely still. Her tail brushed against his leg, and she didn't pull it back. His hand rested near hers, not touching, but close enough to feel the heat. It wasn't romance, not yet, but it was trust, real, earned, and strong. Raya whispered into the dark, "I used to believe I had no place in this galaxy." Jake answered softly, "Maybe your place hadn't been built yet." "And now?" she asked. "Now we build it together," he replied. She closed her eyes and said, "I never thought I'd meet a human like you." Jake smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "I never thought I'd be saved by a girl on all fours dragging my broken cart through a blizzard." Raya gave a quiet laugh, a real one, tired but free. It was the first time he had heard her laugh, and it stayed in his chest like a flame that night. They didn't dream of cages or snow or running. They dreamed of a place where no one owned anyone, where a girl like her could walk through town with her head held high. And a man like him could say, "She's not mine, she's herself." By morning, the storm had passed. The sun broke through the clouds, lighting the ice in gold. Raya stepped out first. The snow sparkling around her feet, Jake followed, rubbing his eyes, and smiled when he saw her stretch her arms to the sky like she was waking up for the first time. She looked over her shoulder and said, "Ready to keep going?" Jake nodded. "Yeah." Together, and this time, She didn't just walk ahead or beside him. She turned, offered her hand, and waited for him to take the first step forward with her. The wind was calm that morning, but Jake knew something was wrong. The snow around them had tracks, fresh ones, wide and heavy, too perfect to be from wild animals. Someone had found them, or was looking for them. Raya noticed it too, her ears twitching. Her eyes narrowing, she crouched low and sniffed the air. 2 machines, she said, maybe more. They had only half a day's journey left to reach Outpost 12, but now every step felt risky. Jake tightened the straps on the cart, packed the supplies quickly, and glanced at her. "Can you still run?" he asked. Raya looked back, her face calm. "I don't need to run," she said. "Not anymore." By midday, they heard the low hum of hoverbikes approaching fast. Jake pulled Raya behind a frozen ridge, but she didn't crouch like before. She stood tall, hands ready, eyes sharp, when the bikes appeared over the hill. Jake recognized the uniforms, outpost enforcers, dressed in white armor with red visors, 3 of them, armed, serious. One pointed at Raya immediately. "That's her, the missing Wallari asset from Outpost 7. Jake stepped in front of her. "She's not your asset. She's not anyone's." The officer's voice came through the helmet, cold and without care. "Her ID says otherwise." "Step aside." Jake didn't move. Raya placed a hand on his shoulder, then stepped forward slowly. Her voice was steady, clear. "I was born in your cages, trained in your labs, but I'm not part of your system anymore." The enforcer scoffed. "You don't get to choose." Jake reached for his bag, slowly pulling out the signal disk they had taken from the old relay tower. He activated it, and a green light blinked. "This disk has her story, her marks, her scars, her voice," he said. "We've already uploaded it to the central net." The second officer hesitated. Checking his wrist device, his visor lit up, then dimmed. He turned to the leader and said quietly, "He's telling the truth. Her claim is already in review." The lead officer growled under his breath. "She's still tagged as station property." "She was," Jake said sharply. "Not anymore." There was silence for a moment, thick with tension. Then the officer raised his gun not to fire, but to scan. A soft blue beam passed over Raya, and the caller ID flashed red before disappearing completely. Her tag had been wiped. The officer stepped back. Surprised, system just cleared her. "Status," he said, slowly. "No longer under station control." Raya didn't react at first. Just stood there, breathing hard. Then she whispered, "It's really gone." Jake smiled. "You're officially free." But as soon as he said it, Raya dropped to her knees, hands shaking, not from fear, but from something she hadn't expected: relief. The enforcers turned and left without another word, their bikes fading into the cold wind. Jake knelt beside her, unsure what to do. She looked up at him, her eyes wet but proud. "I didn't believe it would happen," she said. "Not in this life." He placed a hand behind her neck, gently. "You fought for it." Every step. That evening, they reached the edge of Outpost 12. Lights sparkled in the distance, tall structures rising from the snow like towers of warmth and safety. As they approached the main gate, the guards looked up in surprise. They had seen Jake before on the transport network, but never with a Wallari girl beside him, and never one who walked like a soldier. He showed the ID chip. They scanned it, and the gate opened with a low hum. Raya didn't flinch, didn't lower her head. She walked into that city as someone who had pulled a cart through a blizzard, fought wolves, faced her past, and won her name back. Inside the walls, people stared, whispering, unsure what to make of her. Some looked away, others watched her with curiosity. But one small child, no older than 7, ran up and handed her a blue flower made of paper. "You look like a hero," the child said. Raya froze, then slowly took the flower with both hands. "I don't know what I look like," she whispered. but maybe I can be that. Jake watched her from behind, and for the first time since the engine died in the snow, he realized the girl who once crawled on all fours now walked tall, with eyes forward and the future opening in front of her. A week passed since they arrived at Outpost 12. The snow still fell outside the walls, but inside, things were different now. Raya had a room of her own, a warm one with a real bed, soft clothes, and no locks on the doors. For the first time in her life, she didn't wake up afraid, but freedom, she learned, was not just walking without chains, was learning how to live without them too. Jake stayed in the same building just down the hall. He had been offered transport back to Earth, a return ticket, clean and paid for, but he hadn't accepted yet. Every time he thought about leaving, he remembered the moment she dropped to her knees in the snow, the moment she first laughed, the moment she called herself free. One evening, Raya knocked on his door, not like a servant, not with her head down. She knocked with her knuckles twice, like a person who had the right to be heard. Jake opened the door and smiled when he saw her. She wore a simple jacket, her fur brushed, her eyes calm. "I want to show you something," she said. They walked together toward the outer gate, where the sky opened wide and the snow stretched into forever. At the edge of the outpost, there was a small platform with a view of the valley below. From there, you could see the route they came through, the forest, the hills, even the broken ship buried in white. Raya stood there silently, holding something in her hand. Jake looked closer. Was the small wooden fox she had found in the cage. She placed it gently on the platform's ledge, then let the wind take it. It fell slowly, spinning, vanishing into the snow. "She doesn't need it anymore," Raya whispered. "She's not trapped." Jake didn't speak. He just stood beside her. The silence between them wasn't empty now, was full of meaning. After a while, Raya turned to him. "I don't know what happens next," she said. "I've never been free long enough to plan a future." Jake smiled softly. "Then maybe we build one, a real one, not in cages or snow, but wherever you want." She looked down, nervous, then said, "They want to send me back to Earth with you, for research, for meetings, for news reports?" Jake raised an eyebrow. "And?" "I said yes, but only if you come with me," she added, her voice quieter. Jake chuckled. "You didn't even ask." Raya grinned. "I wasn't sure how." He nodded. "I'll go." They didn't hug. Not yet. But Raya leaned her shoulder against his, and he didn't move away. It was quiet again. But this time it didn't feel like silence. It felt like a beginning. Weeks later, news spread across the systems. Not about war, not about power or machines, but about a girl who once pulled a human's broken cart through a storm. And that same girl walking into Earth's central station beside him. Standing tall, no collar, no chains, just her name Raya. And when a reporter asked her, "Why did you do it?" she paused, then smiled gently and said, "Because I could."